So what are some things companies should be aware of with the updates to PCI version 4? From a PCI qualified auditor perspective, what changes do you need to make now, and how should we as customers plan?
I'll take the overview, and then I'll give you the hard question, Tim, for how to prepare. So,
So Tim's gonna be my
that's the skill I picked up as a manager. I can't help it. So yeah, in March 2022, as most of you probably have seen, version 4.0 was released by PCI, and it was a pretty it's a pretty significant change. Just like if you were just opening up the documents for PCI, before I get into the details, I think before it was like 150 pages or something around there. So if you open up the new report on compliance for version 4.0, it's over 400 pages. Now, there's a reason why it is, but just looking at it just from a page number perspective, you can actually see that there's got to be significant changes. But the good news is they're giving you about a 2-year transition period, right? So PCI version 3.21 or 3.2.1 is actually going to be retired on March 31st, 2024. So that means that you can still do PCI version 3.2.1 up until March 31st, 2024. After March 31st, 2024, you must, if you're going to undergo a PCI assessment with a QSA, you're going to have to use version 4.0. And out of those, for version 4.0, there's actually 64 new requirements. About 50 of them are new requirements that they're calling best practices. And I think about 13 of them are new requirements that have to be implemented immediately if you were to start using version 4.0. The 51 or about 50 new best practices, they're actually giving you till March 31st, 2025 to implement those. So just to kind of recap there, on March 31st, 2024, you have to start using version 4.0, but 50 of those requirements, you don't have to have implemented until March 31st, 2025. So hopefully that makes sense for everybody listening. Most of the new requirements that are effective immediately, as I look through it, are actually around just documenting your roles and responsibilities for the specific requirements. There's a few that are related to the third-party service providers, but most of them that are immediate I think are fairly easy lifts, which is why they made them immediate. The thing to be aware of is, though, they did make a lot of modifications and clarifications to existing requirements that are already in place for 3.2.1. So you will have to review those existing requirements still and understand those new modifications. PCI, Tim could probably get into this a little bit more, but they actually haven't started training QSAs yet on version 4.0. I think that's supposed to start May, June timeframe. So a QSA can actually perform an assessment against version 4.0 if they wanted to, and if you wanted them to, but they can't actually issue an attestation of compliance or a report on compliance until they complete that training. So I'm guessing earliest that somebody could get one on 4.0 will probably be August of 2022, if I had to guess. SAQs have not been updated yet from what I checked right before this webinar, just to make sure, and they have not been published yet to the Security Council website. And then one other change that Tim might get into a little more, they have these new approaches to testing, one being a customized approach and one being a defined approach. The defined approach is just as you would have done in 3.2.1. You implement the control as it's stated, you follow the requirement, and you're good to go. But the customized approach is a little different. It's actually allowing entities to meet a requirement without following the letter of the law of the requirement. So it's allowing you kind of to an alternative method for meeting a requirement. If you have different different tech stack or different architecture, but you have to get the QSA to kind of agree to that, and you have to document it a certain way. That's why there's over 400 pages, because each requirement now the QSA has to fill out, is it the customized approach or is it the defined approach? So it adds a lot to the actual report on compliance. So I think, unlike ISO 27002 changes, I think this one is a pretty significant lift, and that's why they're actually giving 2 to 3 year transition depending on the type of controls. But Tim, curious what your thoughts are as a QSA and what you think the most, the biggest changes might be.
Did you leave anything for me to talk about?
I can't help it, man.
Yeah. So yeah, like like Troy was saying, the only things that you need to do immediately if you want to move to 4.0 are document roles and responsibilities for meeting each of kind of the PCI requirement areas. And then also document your scope. So that's, systems where, cardholder data is stored, processes, transmitted, and then, kind of review and update that scope annually. So, if you're already like PCI kind of compliant, you should have like a data flow diagram. And it's, kind of, I guess, bulking up that documentation to document, that you've reviewed it and that, you've kind of checked for any changes, maybe check for card holder data in other locations. Those are the only things that are available or kind of required immediately. And to your point, like our training's coming due for the year, and we're not sure if it's going to be the 3.21 training again or the 4.0 training yet. If it is the 3.2.1 training, then we'll have to do another round of training for 4.0. So it's kind of like up in the air, like when that'll be available to us. We're not quite sure, but it should be within the next few months. And as far as like the technical requirements that have changed, a few I wanted to highlight were one, like password policy changes. I know like a lot of people now have heard about the new NIST guidance that says longer passwords, lower rotation, and then look to implement password blacklists or banned lists, where you like disallow the use of certain common words and passwords. So the new 4.0 kind of takes that into consideration and requires longer passwords be used, at least 12 characters. It also, specifies that multi-factor authentication is required for any access to cardholder data environments, among other things. Another item that I wanted to highlight from a technical controls perspective is log monitoring, where the old 3.2.1 guidance just said that logs needed to be reviewed daily. Now it says you need to use like an automated tool to assist with, kind of reviewing those logs. So feeding, whenever we talk about logs, those are usually from like your user authentication systems, network logs, so like firewall logs or like NetFlow logs, and feeding them into like an automated tool like a SIM or like a Splunk or something, and using kind of correlating that data together to generate alerts or other kind of targeted information to review. But it's required to use like an automated system rather than just pulling a report of your logs and reading through them. So that's going to be a requirement that people are going to need to put something like that in place if you don't have it already. So yeah, I think what we'll probably see is a lot of 3.2.1 assessments, and then auditors kind of bringing up, or QSAs bringing up, hey, here's the new 4.0 requirements. Let's start thinking about the changes and what you need to do over the next 2 to 3 years to implement it. So yeah, it's nice that you have that runway, and I makes sense. You can't kind of expect people just to be ready for it right away.